Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first ever Battle for Azeroth live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen, aka Community Manager Lore, and I'm here once again with Game Director Ion Hazzikostas. Ion, thank you so much for being here today to answer these questions.
My pleasure. Didn't we technically have a live Battle for Azeroth Q&A right after BlizzCon?
I believe you're actually correct. Our second ever.
First ever
in...
after Battle for Azeroth
Yes.
pre-sales.
This is true, yes. So Battle for Azeroth pre-sales have just gone live, I believe, in North America at this point, and working on getting them live in other regions.
I think that should be rolled out globally as we speak. That process is ongoing.
Yep.
Obviously, there's maybe a couple of issues just due to load on the system, but we're super excited to get this content out there to get people started in unlocking the allied races, and the road begins.
Yeah, super exciting stuff. Awesome to finally have that out in players' hands and able to go ahead and pre-purchase that.
So just a couple of details, I guess, related to that, just to get information out there. I know there's a lot of questions circulating. So the way it works, allied races, if you purchase Battle for Azeroth, the next time you log in, if you buy through the in-game shop, you might have to relog. But when you log in as a 110 character, you'll get pushed a quest that summons you to the embassy in either Stormwind or Orgrimmar, depending on your faction, where you will learn about the requirements for unlocking allied races. And if you meet the requirements for one of the two races available to your faction, you'll be able to undertake the quest line right then and there to go ahead and unlock that allied race. One other thing, we know that, with a 12 character limit per realm, we know that a lot of people have 12 characters, and while we were, certainly raising that limit for Battle for Azeroth itself, we'd like to get that into your hands sooner, so we're actively working on a little change that's going to give everybody 4 extra character slots per realm. And that's not associated with pre-purchasing Battle for Azeroth. That's just going to be a global change. Everyone will have 4 extra character slots.
Awesome.
Keep your eyes, peeled for forum and other updates, hotfix notes, and we'll get that information out there as soon as that change is live.
And it's still a maximum per account of 50.
Yes.
Correct. It's just the per realm limit.
Correct.
Is going up by 4 slots, which is awesome. Great. So we do actually have a real short video that we can look at that goes into some of the details. If you are pre-purchasing and you'd like to get started on unlocking those allied races, got a real quick video we can show you guys. Just about a minute. We'll be right back. All right, so that is. So I know I say it like always in these. I use the phrase "that's super exciting" about 400 times for every Q&A, but I feel like today's is super exciting because we have just unlocked that Battle for Azeroth pre-purchase, and I'm excited. I'm personally excited to get in there and start unlocking those allied races. So that should be super cool. Excellent. 2 of us, only millions to go.
No, just us 2.
Just
no one else is excited.
All right. Well, as long as we're excited, then. I guess mission accomplished. Anyway, so let's get into these questions we've got lined up here today. Obviously, we had a lot come in about allied races just leading up to today, which is convenient. So we'll start with this first one from Patavita, who asked, how will the allied race unlocks work? Will it be an account-wide unlock? I'm exalted with the Nightfallen and would hate to grind out the rep on the Horde side as well.
It's true. I also hate playing through storylines. No, so yes, the allied race unlocks are account-wide. Once you've unlocked it, you can make it across your entire account. The requirements are also account-wide. So if you've played Alliance characters primarily thus far, you have an Alliance character that's finished the Insurrection campaign and is exalted with the Nightfallen, you need a Horde character to unlock the Nightfallen, but you will automatically have met those requirements, and once you have a 110 Horde character, you can jump right into unlocking the allied race across your account.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, Given that there is like a little bit of a storyline about how the Nightfallen are actually coming to the Horde
It
and so on, it would be weird to be like, I'm an Alliance character helping you join the enemy.
That would be very strange. Yes.
All right, cool. Moving on. Next question from Trivia Cow. You talked about this in the intro, but just to go through the question, will we get our extra character? I missed the moo. I'm sorry. Moo.
How dare you?
Will we get our extra character slots with the pre-order? And as you were saying, we're actually just going to give everybody 4 extra character slots regardless.
Exactly, and that will be happening in the near future, hopefully within the next day or 2.
Awesome. Moving right along. Next question from Extreme, who said, the addition of allied races provides great new customization options. However, with each race added, the pool of racial abilities to balance becomes larger. Does the team consider this a possible issue going forward?
It's always something we're cognizant of when we're expanding, player combat abilities, whether in any form, whether it's new skills, new talents, modifications like the artifact, legendaries, all of the above. They're extra knobs and moving pieces in a system that is challenging to balance. That said, I think with racial abilities, for some time now, for the last couple of expansions, we tried to pull back a bit on the raw power level of these abilities. I think that probably reached its peak back in Mists of Pandaria with, the original form of things like Berserking and Blood Fury with dot snapshotting and, and on the, the history of the human racial on the PvP side of things. So I think at this point, the overall power level of the racials is such that while there may be differences, they're much less likely to be a deciding factor. I think the big exception right now among the live racials is Blood Elf Arcane Torrent, which is just particularly, I would say, dominating in a lot of ways, frankly, in both PvP and in coordinated dungeon environments. And that's something that's not, it's not about, is this worth 1% power or whatever. Having those extra interrupts, to say nothing of the silence, is actually just fundamentally transformative in a way that it enables tactics you otherwise wouldn't have. That's a racial we are likely taking a look at in 8.0 because it does need to change in some way. But otherwise, we feel pretty confident about the level of power in the racials we're adding and going to continue to add going forward. And it's more about flavor. And yes, there will be cases here or there where having a specific race or being a specific race is advantageous, but it's not the worst thing in the world as long as everyone gets their moment in the spotlight. And I think we wouldn't want to pull back from adding new flavorful abilities out of just concern about balance issues.
All right, makes sense. I know that a lot of the new allied race racials. That's a difficult thing to actually say. A lot of the racial abilities from the new allied races, people have been looking at and going, "Whoa, that seems crazy." Like I know I was looking at the Void Elf racial and being like, "Wait, so I can just send a thing in that direction and run over here and then teleport back over there?" And that's
it enables.
Cool.
The Void Elf racial is really interesting. You have to see it and play around with it in game. It has some fun nuance to it, but it's not Mage Blink. It's not a direct copy of that, because the way it actually works is when you trigger the button, when you trigger the ability the first time, you send out this sort of little like void tracer disc that actually moves about as fast as you, a player, would run. And that just kind of drifts forward. When you push the button again within a window of time, you port to that location. So if you're in, a tight spot, you're standing in fire or something, it's not a teleport that's going to get you out of that instantly on demand. It requires pre-planning to use. So that makes it in many ways more limited than a lot of instant teleports that can be used reactively in an emergency. But it does enable some interesting sort of tactical gameplay when you can pre-plan if you want to, you're going to want to go somewhere a few seconds ahead of time. It's unique, flavorful, definitely powerful, but not overly so.
Yeah, I'm just imagining in my head like some sort of like arena tournament environment where we're like freaking out because someone threw their Void Elf teleport off in a direction and the other team like split off so that one of them could be there and block them from wanting to teleport. I'm sorry, I'm kind of geeking out about that a little bit. Let's move on and answer more questions. This one comes from Morgan Rules 59 on Twitter, who asked, why did you decide to make the allied races rep and achievement locked? A lot of people have been asking this question, especially since the initial data mining of allied races really started. So what's going on there?
I think it's less about the specific details of the system and more about, I think, the story and what makes them different from regular races. I think these aren't long-standing members of the Alliance or the Horde. We wanted to introduce a wider variety of new races. Again, as we talked about at BlizzCon, this was sort of our spin on the oft-requested sub-races feature that players have been talking about for a long time.
Yeah.
And part of explaining, why did the Nightborn join the Horde? A lot of Alliance players are, rightly outraged, saying the Nightborn should have joined us. They made a stupid decision. We want to take players, and we want to take everyone through the story and through the experience of bringing this faction into your race, bring this race into your faction, rather. And the form that takes, the best way of measuring that in our game is things like reputation or achievements, right? The achievement is we'll complete the entire quest line that tells the story of the Nightborn insurrection, or the story of you uniting the High Mountain tribes and fighting off the Drogbar. And then reputation is kind of a complement to that. It also, it makes it more likely that you will have spent a good amount of time working with, helping, understanding this culture before you bring them into your faction and potentially play as one. And, obviously, as the requirements are something we're likely going to look back at as time goes on. We'll see how much sense it makes as we get into later expansions and have more and more of these allied races. But in the space of Legion right now, for the 4 allied races that are available, these requirements more or less boil down to play the content, play the game associated with these zones, with these races.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think it's a good point to consider as well with the allied races, just that there is a sort of story that leads up to them joining a particular faction, and now that it's in players' hands, hopefully they'll have a chance to see that a little bit more.
And in a lot of ways, with other races, we gave you, that story was sort of front-loaded, and you played through it from 1 to 10 in the Goblin starting experience or what have you.
Yep.
Allied races instead start at 20. So I think instead of playing through, a very low-level experience with 1 or 2 buttons on your bar, you're playing through more of the content on the other end of things at your max level, and then jumping into the action a bit later on.
That makes sense. Next question here from Gwanin, who asked, will we be allowed to access Dark Iron Dwarves and Zandalari Trolls before the release of BFA, or will this be after the expansion is out?
So I think the pre-release allied races are the 4 that were just made available today. They're the ones that are closely associated with Legion. Once Battle for Azeroth releases, after you're leveling to 120, going to the new lands, you will be able to begin working on the requirements to unlock future allied races, such as the Dark Iron Dwarves or the Orcs from Draenor that we've hinted at, and then things like Zandalari Trolls. Again, that's going to be part of the story as the expansion unfolds down the line. Gaining the Zandalari as allies is a huge part of the storyline of Battle for Azeroth. Our whole point in going to Zandalar is to enlist their aid, but we're going to have to solve a lot of their problems before we get to that point. That's the story we're telling here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's similar to how the current, now they're current, allied races that are available. A lot of what's going on there is you just sort of going, hey, yo, we've been helping you out with all of your problems for a long period of time. You should join us. It would be weird to, within the first few hours of questing in Zandalar, just showing up and be like, hey, guys, so y'all want to join the Horde? It's great.
I think if you imagine, imagine if allied races had existed in Legion as a feature from the start. High Mountain and Nightborn probably would have had similar requirements, would have played out in very much the same way, right? You would have leveled up through Legion, gotten to know these new cultures, worked with them, solved their problems over the course of, a bunch of story content, and then at the end of that journey, been able to unlock them. And so that's kind of the similar approach that we'll take with new cultures that you're meeting as we go into Battle for Azeroth and beyond.
Yeah, it's a big commitment joining the Alliance or Horde, so got to make sure we respect that in the actual game. All right, so here's a question that I know a lot of people are asking because it's about the only thing we see in Twitch chat.
I was about to say, I can't see the Twitch chat window from right here right now, but I'm sure solo queue is being spammed and has been for the last 10 minutes.
So question here from Fix and also apparently literally everyone else. Is there any chance that we might see 3v3 or RBG solo queue in Battle for Azeroth?
Honestly, I would say unlikely. Here's why. So, first off, I think we view the pre-made experience as one of the major differentiators between ranked rated PvP and solo random queue, random battlegrounds, skirmish arena. to a large extent, if you could just solo queue, yes, there might be more involved matchmaking, but it very much blurs the distinctions between those two things. But I think the more important reason, and I know a lot of people have said, well, look at other games with PvP components, look at other genres, look at MOBAs out there across the board, look at Overwatch. All of these have successful solo-rated queue systems. Why doesn't that work for World of Warcraft? I think probably the biggest difference, honestly, is that in all of those other systems where composition matters, composition matters, cooperation matters, there's much more flexibility after the team is formed to change your composition. If you're playing a MOBA, you go through, a pick ban phase before you actually jump into the game. In Overwatch, of course, you can change your composition on the fly. It's a core part of the game. But WoW's an MMORPG, and you're not queuing as you, the human being behind the keyboard. You are a Blood Elf mage, or a Dwarf Paladin, or whatever. That is your character. That's not flexible. And composition is very important. And it's not just which compositions are viable versus which aren't, but also your tactics that you develop and how you cooperate and how you play as a certain comp or against other comps. And so I don't think it's realistic for us to offer a good matchmaking experience that also gives you a reasonable composition against fairly matched opponents and reasonable queue times. I don't think that we could deliver all three of those things consistently. I think it would produce a frustrating experience in very different ways. I think there's also playing with and on a regular basis, getting to know arena partners or RBG partners. You improve, you cooperate, and that there's a lot of depth to the gameplay there, also on a social level. So I think the approach we'd like to take is to make it easier, more accessible to get into these formats. And there's a couple of avenues we can approach there. On the RBG side, we know that 10v10 is getting 10 people together, keeping 10 people together, particularly with some of the comp goals that you have in putting together an RBG team. That can be very daunting. We've tried out some 6v6 formats, through a brawl. I feel like that has been promising, and that's something I think we're considering moving the RBG format to 6v6 for Battle for Azeroth, which should lower the barrier to entry significantly just in terms of the logistics of assembling and coordinating and maintaining a group of that size. And separately, we'd like to add and improve social tools to make it easier to find arena partners and RBG partners. I think our community system actually has a lot of potential on this front. Rather than just relying on the pre-made group finder, I think I would hope that we will see cross-server communities forming that are, hey, this is a 1600 to 1800 arena community of people who are just let each other know when they're queuing, looking for more, get to know some familiar faces in there. You can, have scheduled times when most people are going to be around if you're trying to do RPGs, whatever else, and make it easier to get those matches made. It's something where obviously this isn't an issue we consider closed. We're going to keep looking at it, keep working on it. But I think those are the approaches and those are the steps we're taking in Battle for Azeroth. And we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it should be clear that solo queue is something we talk about a lot. I'm pretty sure I have this conversation at least once a week with somebody on the dev team. And I know that they talk about it much more than that. It's something that we've been working for a long time on trying to figure out a way to make it work for World of Warcraft. But sort of the problem we run into is as you sort of go through the imagining how this actually works in function, you quickly get into a state where you see, okay, well, as a Death Knight, for example, like you have fairly limited what players would call viable comps, and what realistically are probably viable comps as well. And so there's certain, okay, I'm a Death Knight, and so I never want to play with a Discipline Priest, for example. And maybe that's your personal choice or whatever. And so now it's like, okay, well, now you don't queue this person with a Discipline Priest, but the only other people who are available don't want to play with a Resto Druid or a Resto Shaman. So now there's only like two other, and you get to a point where like already we occasionally have issues with queue times at very high rating. Yeah. This would quickly get into a point where like, okay, I'd like to solo queue some arena. I'm 2.2K. My queue time is 30 minutes or longer, and that would be really bad. So again, it's something that we really want to be able to figure out how to make work, but as of yet we don't have a solve for it.
Yep.
Cool. Making sure I'm not making up too much off the top of my head right there. All right. Question here from Jiraiya. This is a question that I'm actually going to answer. Hooray, I get to answer one. Who asked, any news about the arena spectator mode? And the reason we have this one in here is because we see it asked a lot, and clearly we've done a very bad job of communicating this because it's been in the game since 7.2.5.
Kind of.
So basically, the way it works is when you use the there's a slash command /invite spectator match, and if you look that up, you can just Google search it, and there's a couple of guides out there that you can check it out. We need to find a better way to communicate this ourselves rather than obviously go to Google and search for this so that someone else can tell you how to do it is not the most ideal way for you to get that information. But it is out there if you use the invite spectator match command. I believe there's a couple of add-ons that help automate that process for you as well. It just comes up and it's automatically there, and you're able to get in there and use the same arena spectator interface that we use at like BlizzCon and tournaments and so on.
Yeah, and I think it was largely rolled out. I mean, it in its current form, it's definitely more of a power user tool. Right?
Yeah,
It's definitely there to help with community-run tournaments, things along those lines.
Yeah.
But it's there, and it's something we can build upon going forward.
Yeah, and so if you are somebody who is considering running a tournament, even if it's just a tournament for a few of your guildmates or whatever, it is there available for you to use. Not the greatest thing to try and use for just generally watching arena matches because of how you have to use it, but that's kind of by design as well. Question here from Glade Warden, who asked, any plans to tweak the prestige system? The concept is great, but as it stands now, it's not nearly rewarding enough for how long the grind is.
So, yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about what we think about prestige and how to carry the prestige system forward beyond Legion. I think the answer isn't to keep adding, dozens of new tiers with new mounts and cosmetic rewards at each of them, such that when somebody comes to the game a few years from now, they're looking at this ridiculous road ahead of them and wait, there's like 80 prestige levels for me to get if I want to unlock all these rewards.
Yeah.
At the same time, we also don't want to undermine the time people have put into the system over the course of Legion. People have worked, as you note, very hard and spent a lot of time playing Battlegrounds and PvP in general to earn the rewards that are available. So I think our current thoughts, and this is still early, subject to change for sure, is to keep the prestige system, to keep the prestige ranks that we have from Legion largely as they stand with the rewards that they have, to continue adding new ranks beyond that in Battle for Azeroth and beyond, but to have those ranks, as you go further, largely just give you, similar to sort of the Overwatch structure, give you a box or some repeatable reward at the end that has, whether it's currency, whether it's, we'll figure out exactly what makes sense to go in it. And your prestige level just becomes a measure of how much you've PvP'd, how much you've invested into the system, how experienced you are overall. And there may be, some titles or some other benchmarks along the way that we give special recognition to. But again, it's very similar to that Overwatch sense and what your level means in Overwatch and other games with similar systems. That's not to say we're not going to keep awarding, new mounts and titles and everything else that we do through PvP, but we don't feel that the right way is to just add, an endless system there that's going to always expand and become completely unapproachable to anyone who's coming to the system for the first time.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that the prestige system is something that I'm really interested in personally because I just like doing random battlegrounds. So it's fun to have that sort of constant progression. So any sort of improvements there sounds awesome. I missed an opportunity there. I could have done I was playing my shaman the other day, sort of play into the meme.
But you missed the opportunity, so
I
it's
missed
too late.
it, yeah. I was playing my shaman the other day, and I missed a different opportunity. So that was, whatever. Anyway, I'm trying to meme too hard. Question here from Dalaran YT, who asked, will there be more updates to honor talents in BFA? Feels like there are a lot of dead talents that just don't get picked unless you are in... I forgot this question was in here. Unless you're in some very specific situation that could only be written in fan fiction.
I am interested in what fan fiction you're reading.
It was in that moment that Sea-Doo realized. Tidebringer.
You're trying to get your shaman stuff back in here, aren't you? Okay, so yeah, I think honor talents definitely something that needs to evolve. This is actually something that, really in many ways is connected with the prestige system as well. We came into Legion with this structure that was, similar to other games, kind of Call of Duty-ish, where you earned honor talents that would prestige and originally reset that whole progression and keep unlocking them repeatedly. For a lot of reasons, that design didn't actually end up fitting or playing out in World of Warcraft the way we'd imagined. We're happy with where that side of things ended up. That said, yeah, there are a bunch of talents that aren't necessarily competitive within their individual rows, it also has ended up feeling much more than we'd like a barrier to entry for new people entering and approaching the system. Um, it feels like if you're just getting into PvP until you've unlocked all your honor talents, you're kind of you're at a significant disadvantage compared to everybody else. Maybe you have the leftmost column, but some of the best talents for your class, for your spec, may be elsewhere. So it doesn't really feel like a reward the way we hoped it would. So a couple of changes planned to how honor talents might work in Battle for Azeroth. Current thinking is actually moving away from having an exact mirror of our regular talent system where we have multiple rows of 3, and instead moving to a larger bucket where there may be couple dozen talents all in this single pool that you're choosing from, and you get to pick 3 out of that pool. Separately, we're probably going to keep a 4th slot that's just trinket customization, because I think that first row is actually one of the most successful ones. It's a mix of sort of what gameplay you prefer, what situations you're in. Are you a healer likely to be trained all the time in battlegrounds, or do you want, whatever you'd like to use to adapt or otherwise? And it's hard to really make a player choose between your trinket and other honor talents. The trinket's kind of special, so that's going to stand on its own. But so imagine that for your other 3, you just have a pool of many of the existing honor talents that you know and love, as well as some new ones. It gives us a chance to get rid of some that haven't worked out at all, that clearly are unpopular or aren't contributing to good gameplay. And you pick whichever 3 you want for the given situation, and that gives you more flexibility in constructing a build as well. If you want to focus on mobility, that's something you'll be more able to do when you're not just choosing within, let's say, a mobility row, but rather you might have multiple options that you can all focus on, or defense, or control, or whatever you prefer for how you want to play the game, how you want to work out with your teammates. And these talents will be unlocked just as you level up naturally, like your player level, not your honor level. So just in the course of leveling up to 110, 120, when you hit max level, you'll have access to the entire pool of talents.
That's cool.
And even if you've never done a battleground before, you'll jump in with the same options available to you to at least customize your character and work your way up from there.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. There's lots of different ways that could play. I'm a big fan of here's a ton of options. You can only pick a couple of them from this giant list sort of approach, because it allows you to do a lot of really fun and interesting stuff with the different honor talents as well. So that I'm really excited for that.
Overall, I think
I didn't know about that.
More freedom of choice and lower barrier to entry is kind of what we're approaching the system with.
Question here from Baby Back Rib, and we've obviously been talking about this a bunch already, but will there be any other PvP updates in Battle for Azeroth than the already announced world PvP changes? So we just went over a couple. Yeah, so like Prestige, Honor Talents,
yes.
We've been talking about that. Anything else?
I mean, as mentioned at BlizzCon, we obviously have a new Battleground that you're going to get a preview of in Silithus coming up soon. That will be dropping before Battle for Azeroth hits. New arena maps. In general, I think separately on the rewards and mechanics side, we also have other changes that we're working on. I think one of the biggest, most controversial changes we made to PvP in Legion was moving to fixed stat templates for characters when you are in any sort of rated organized PvP environment, or organized PvP environment, whether rated or not.
Right.
And I think the goal there was, again, lowering barriers to entry, minimizing the importance of gear, or the sense that, if you were just hitting max level or didn't have the latest, greatest stuff, you were at a hopeless disadvantage. And I think the way you used to gear up in PvP had some of those downsides to it. It was until you got your resilience up or whatever, you would just queue into BGs, get completely splattered, but kind of grind enough honor until you could get enough gear to hold your own. And then it felt like, okay, you earned the right to participate as an equal, but that wasn't really a reward. So we're trying to solve all those things. But we do feel like it's likely that we gave up a bit too much in terms of those RPG dynamics that still underlie what this entire game is and what this environment is. And that we can find ways of making item level a bit less important in PvP while still letting players customize their stats, customize their gear. We've actually taken some cues for how level scaling works in the outdoor world, how it's possible for a 103 player and a 107 player to group together and fight a dungeon boss and have the mechanics work out such that both of them can have a balanced and compelling experience. The healer can heal the tank despite their level differences, and it works out. There's some ways that we could adapt that logic in a different way to PvP combat, where you still wear gear still matters, gear still has the stats that you want. If you want to stack crit, you can stack crit. If you want to stack mastery, you can stack mastery. But if someone has an eye level that's 50 above yours, they're not actually 50% stronger than you. They may
Mm.
still only be 5 to 10% stronger than you because of how the combat calculations work out. And I think that could get us the more compressed tuning range. Because I think for raid progression, for dungeon progression at endgame, we want huge power gaps. We want the sense that, this raid is meaningfully harder than the last one, and you need to gear up, and maybe you're not as good as Method, but when you get to this boss, 3 months in, you're going to have much more gear and artifact power and whatever else, and so you'll have an advantage, and that requires large power jumps. That's not what we really want in PvP. I think we want gear to matter, but not to the point that you don't stand a fighting chance against somebody because you haven't yet caught up. And so keeping customization, still controlling power. And what this also means is that it maybe lets us go back to some more familiar and perhaps successful systems of delivering PvP loot through things like vendors and giving you more control over the gear and what stats you want in a world where it's not just the item level of the piece that matters, but you do once again care about whether it has crit or haste or mastery.
Yeah, I remember a lot of like in the Mists and to some degree in Warlords as well. Actually to a fairly strong degree in Warlords as well. There was a lot of discussion around like, I like to play my mage stacking this. I stack mastery on my arcane mage. No, I stack crit or something like that instead. So it's really cool to see that sort of gameplay coming back to PvP. I know a lot of players have been asking for that as well. Question here from eroll64300 on Twitter, who asked, how will the world PvP work? You said that people across all servers will be separated between PvE and PvP status, but will all PvP players from every server be on the same instance, or will it be separated as it is now? We've had lots of different questions since we started talking about this at BlizzCon, in terms of just what the new world PvP situation even is. So could we get some clarity on how that's going to work?
So when you enable this mode and you venture out, you'll go to Orgrimmar, you go to Stormwind, you'll toggle it on. When you go out into the world, you'll be in a PvP-enabled version of the world with other players who've made that same decision. Now, obviously, not literally all players across the entire region can fit in the exact same instance of the zone. Otherwise, that would crash our servers and not be the greatest experience. But so they're still shards. But on the PvP side of things, we're able to sort of help determine the populations of a given zone with more of an eye towards faction balance than we normally otherwise have. We'll keep your groups together, all of that, but the goal here is, even if you are on, Mal'Ganis, which is 99% Horde in North America, or you're on Sargeras, which is just as skewed towards Alliance, when you go into a PvP server, you're going to see people from the opposite faction. You can actually have that PvP experience. And so part of what makes the system satisfying is our ability to construct the shard balance in that way. And now the one exception to this will be RP servers. So shout out to Emerald Dream and other folks in similar boats out there. RP servers will still continue to follow the existing RP server rules, where there is no involuntary sharding or coalescing. Obviously, you can intentionally group across servers. That's still allowed. But if you turn on this mode on Emerald Dream, when you go out into the world, you'll see people from Emerald Dream specifically, and not random other servers mixed in.
Will it still on the RP servers? Will it still allow you to pick between the PvP mode and PvE mode
of course.
when you go out in the world?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. That's exactly. Yeah. So really, what we're saying is, in Battle for Azeroth and beyond, rather than having 4 server types like we do today, we're going to have 2 server types. It's going to be normal and RP. And on both of those types, you can opt into PvP, and that exists as it always had. But we don't have that arbitrary distinction of, because you're on this server, you're forced into this mode, or you're on that server, you're forced into that mode. Especially in light of the fact that with cross-server grouping, and as it's been for the past years, you can hop between those modes freely as it stands. We just want to give players more control over that choice, and the ability to really build infrastructure and content behind it in a way that we couldn't when we knew that on PvE servers across the region, that content was not going to be accessible or make sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know. I've played on PvP servers for the entire span of the game, and that's because I enjoy that sort of like risk of being out in the open and someone might come out and try and attack me. But every once in a while, I'm just like, I just want to get my world quest done. I just want to go out,
Yep.
do this world quest, and go back.
Yeah, or you just randomly join a world quest group, not realizing it, and suddenly see orange names around you, and
Yeah.
realize, oh, I guess I'm on a PvE server.
What do you mean I can't kill these people? Terrible. All right, question here from Anatheria. Actually, this ties in directly with what we were just talking about. Is it possible that we could get a server where all cross-realm features, including sharding, are disabled?
So roleplay servers work kind of like this in that we, except in the cases of extreme load, we disable these features involuntarily. That is to say, we're not just going to randomly split you up without your control across multiple shards or pulling people from other realms. The exception to this is events and times of high traffic when we launch Battle for Azeroth and the entire server population is gathering around one of a couple of NPCs to kick off the expansion. We are going to shard the cities in that specific case so that the servers don't crash or you don't have terrible lag and you have a smooth launch experience. But we always view those as temporary changes, with the default state being default sharding and coalescing disabled. That said, it's not completely disabled in the sense that you can't voluntarily do it if you want to do it. Right? We don't have a server where there is no cross-realm group finder or the ability to party for world quests or dungeons or raids. And I mean, that's been floated in the past as the concept of like a pristine realm or something like that. That's not something we currently have any plans on doing. I think we generally feel like the ability to play with your friends wherever they may be trumps the benefits of those restrictions. But for roleplay communities, having them off by default preserves a lot of the server identity in those communities, and we get most of the benefits while still allowing for play with your friends in other realms.
Yeah, opt-in sharding and cross-realm features are like, if you don't want to do those, then just don't. But there's nothing that's going to really, except for what you were talking about, nothing that's going to really force you into it otherwise. Cool. Next question here from Warfist, asking, what are the rewards of the new Uncharted Islands, and will they scale like Mythic Plus Dungeons? So we talked at BlizzCon a little bit about islands and the different sort of difficulty modes for it. How does that translate into how the rewards will work?
So I think we're still figuring out the details of the rewards. I think it's likely that islands will be a very lucrative source of Azerite, this new resource that you'll be using to power up the heart of Azeroth. But also, with multiple difficulties, we're thinking about normal, heroic, and mythic versions of the islands currently, as well as a PvP mode for them. On the PvP mode, you probably get honor, but with the increasing difficulty, probably much like other reward systems in our game, some powerful gear, more powerful gear, and higher difficulties. Details to follow as we kind of dial in the exact tuning of those reward systems in our alpha.
Okay. Next question from Deathleecher, who says, do Warfronts take some elements from Warcraft RTS, like building units and being able to use them? Obviously, when we first started talking about Warfronts, we sort of framed them as, this is kind of trying to take that feel at least and bring that into World of Warcraft. To what lengths does that go, I guess?
It's definitely very heavily inspired from Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3 RTS elements, everything from buildings to units to resources. But at the same time, it's trying to tell that story and ground that fantasy in an MMO wrapper. And so when you say being able to use them, no, you don't get to build, train grunts or footmen and control them literally RTS style by
like clicking around on the map.
Doing any of that. Another way of viewing it is more imagine a Warcraft 3 map if you got to play as the hero on that map. So in many ways, you might be, clearing creep, you might be bringing resources back to your base, contributing them to help upgrade your town hall to level 2 so that you can build an armory, so that you can train this new unit type. And when you train that unit type, which you can do, they will just follow you into battle or charge off towards an objective, but you're going to be the one leading them towards the front lines to take over an enemy encampment and build your way forward from there. So very heavy inspiration, but it's not an RTS, to be clear.
Yeah, it doesn't suddenly switch into a top-down clicking around.
It is core World of Warcraft combat mechanics with very heavily RTS-inspired systems.
That makes a lot of sense, and I imagine that's probably what most people were expecting after what we were talking about, but it's good to get the clarification. Question from Mad Max, who asked, during BFA, can Horde characters visit Kul Tiras and Alliance characters visit Zandalar? And will there be camps or bases of each faction in both islands? I know we talked a little bit about this in the past as well. it's sort of like Zandalar is the leveling experience for the Horde, Kulturas is the leveling experience for the Alliance, and then it sort of crosses over once you reach max level. But how does that actually work?
So yeah, the answer is yes
or did
to
I
both
just
questions.
say everything?
Pretty much. So I think the glue here is what we alluded to at BlizzCon, what we're calling the War campaign. In many ways, it's the successor to the Garrison campaign or the Class Order campaign. As you level up, the chapters of the War campaign are largely going to be themed around journeying to the opposite factions' subcontinent, finding what they're up to, understanding what they're up to there, building up a little bit of a stronghold, a foothold, a small base of operations that can serve as a staging ground for future activities. This will also introduce you to the zones, introduce you to the cultures that are found there, help explain and give you some motivation for why at max level you're going to want to go into the dungeons that you're finding there. Then at 120, yes, the whole thing opens up more formally. You'll have world quests on the opposite subcontinent. You'll have more story content that you're doing there. And it's, 6 zones, a whole world that's available to everybody, even though you're just leveling in half of it.
Okay, so kind of like it's like the leveling experience is sort of like, let's go to this new area. We know this war is coming. Let's go to this new area and try to get the support of the people that live in this new area, and then maybe make a couple of like small inroads. And then by the time you get to max level, now it's like, okay, whoa, the war is here. Let's go fight
some
it.
of that, or just scouting and understanding what are the Alliance up to? What's going on in Stormsong? And yeah, like you said, are there some people here who might be sympathetic to our cause, and building up a sort of secluded, beachfront cove base that can serve as a staging ground for later on. That's just one example of many.
Okay, cool. Question here from Ranthe, who asked, in the dev water cooler, it was mentioned that you want to return a lot of class and spec-specific benefits and abilities, a la CC availability and the like. How will this be balanced in order to avoid class stacking? And I know we've seen a little bit of this through data mining over the past few days, but talking a lot about the class and spec-specific benefits, how are we actually going to prevent that from turning into bring the class, not the player?
We're not always going to. Sometimes you should bring the class. Like,
fair enough.
Seriously, like if you're a pug leader and you have 3 mages and 3 hunters and 0 warlocks, and you have 3 applicants for a spot in your group, and one's a hunter, one's a mage, and one's a warlock, there should be compelling reasons to want to bring the class that you don't have. So to some extent, I think it's the opposite of class stacking. I think the goal here is actually to encourage a wide diversity of class and spec representation. I think the most successful RBG groups, the most successful mythic raids, these should have people with as many different tools as possible. And I think in a lot of ways, when there's too much homogenization and multiple people are bringing, or too many people are bringing this exact same tools, then there's going to be one who is best. There's going to be one who's, all right, well, we need an AoE stun. There's like 7 people who bring that, but one of them also brings the best AoE DPS, or one of them has the best AoE stun of the group. And so you just bring a lot of them. There's no downside to that. Whereas if it's more like you're just trying to cover all your bases, then there's offsetting strengths and weaknesses that make a better, more balanced, more effective whole. That's ideal. And then obviously in smaller groups, there's some trade-offs. You can't have everything. If you're trying to make a dungeon group, there's different tools, different buffs. You're not going to have access to all of them regardless of what you do. And so your gameplay changes a little bit depending on whether you have a rogue who can help you skip past a pack, or whether you have better AoE crowd control, or warlock for a gateway, or other tools that you might have. And that's kind of cool too. It's varied gameplay. It makes individual class abilities feel and play out in a more impactful way. So that said, it's also incumbent upon encounter design, other parts of the game, to create situations that make those tools and those abilities valuable. Obviously, if everybody has different tools, but one class happens to be useful 90% of the time, while other classes have tiny little niche effects, then that's not actually, we're not actually going to be achieving our goals that way.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting thinking about how the bring the player, not the class sort of mantra has evolved things since basically Burning Crusade when it first came in, and you were stacking like 5 shaman and stuff like that.
Exactly, and bring the player, not the class, I think is one of the most misinterpreted phrases over time. It really was. I mean, I remember when, Ghostcrawler posted blogs about this way back. It was early Wrath days. It was a response to a completely degenerate situation at the end of Burning Crusade, where we didn't have raid-wide buffs for the most part, except for things like, Prayer Fortitude and Mark of the Wild. Almost everything was party-based. It was, Battle Shout, it was Wind Fury Totem, it was Leader of the Pack, it was all of that stuff that led to this bizarre Tetris jigsaw puzzle situation, just constructing groups, where it wasn't like you could say, we actually really want an extra, I don't know, an extra rogue because they have a great tool that will help us on this encounter, but there isn't room in the melee group for them.
Yeah.
And unless they have Battle Shout, unless they have, whatever else, they're not actually going to be effective. You're better off. You need to bring a caster because there is room in the caster synergy group. And that's the part of, like, that's what we meant when we said way back when, we want you to bring the player, not the class. We don't want to be in a situation where we're saying, okay, the only thing that will fit right now into this group composition matrix that we have is this particular narrow thing. Now, that can be interpreted as yes, no. If you have 7 players who are all hunters, yeah, you probably actually should at some point value wanting to bring a wider variety of classes. And I think that's also as the pickup group scene becomes more and more vibrant, more robust with tools like the pre-made group finder out there, we know it's frustrating as a DPS class especially to apply to a group, and you feel like you just get turned down 5-6 times in a row. The experience on the flip side, though, is often when someone has tanks and healers and they're posting availability for a group, they'll instantly get 20 applications for 2 slots. And it's a very hard choice for them to sort through and pick out who they want to add. They often just go on, well, who has the highest item level, who has the highest Raider IO score, or whatever else. But in a time where ideally, every class has unique tools, and it's not just about who is perceived to be 3% better on the damage meters, there should always be a space for your class and a spot for your class. It's going to make it more likely and easier to find a spot in those groups, rather than, feeling like because this patch, the perception is that your spec is a few percent behind the others, no one wants you anymore. There should be more consistency there.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, like it's easy for things to. I would argue that things have gotten so much to the point, what we're trying to get away from, so much to the point where your class doesn't matter as much, and it is just about what DPS you bring, how much your healing is, to the point where guilds will be like, sorry, you're not an Affliction Warlock, so we don't need you for our DPS, or whatever the top spec happens to be, the perceived top spec happens to be at the
perceived
time.
top spec. Let's call them Affliction Warlock, just as a shorthand.
Sometimes
you just have a lot of survivability and a lot of offensive tools and a lot of multi-dotting and a lot of single target
and all the damage.
But no king rules forever.
Oh dear. All right. Next question. That got terrifying there for a second. Very ominous. Question here from Deliaris, who said, in the water cooler you mentioned class utility and identity, then talk about specs, main role, strength, and weakness. Will BFA have more class-wide utility? So obviously we were just talking about this quite a bit, but looking at class-wide utility, and not necessarily something that like I specifically need a shadow priest for this, but a priest in general.
I think so, yes. I think, again, looking back to the lessons of Legion and some of the philosophies that have come out of its development, we focused a lot on class identity, but I think that too often we probably over-prioritized spec identity at the expense of class identity. And that you're not just a subtlety rogue, you're also a rogue. You're not just a fire mage, you're also a mage. At the end of the day, that's what you picked at character creation when you decided you wanted to make the class. And where possible, there should be more class-wide strengths. Now, there's some limits there. I think when you have hybrids, there are some tools that we really want to keep closely wedded to specific roles. Like major raid-wide healing cooldowns, for example. You'd have to be a restoration shaman to have that, or a holy paladin to have that. That's a core role function. And I think in the past, when you had things like hybrid tranquility and other much more effective ancestral guidance, etc., you actually saw in a lot of ways DPS utility eat away at the core functionality of being a healer. And in Mists of Pandaria, you just had a lot of cooldown rotations that let you under heal fights drastically and made the healer's job feel much less important. We don't want class-wide utility in a way that stomps on core functionality.
Right.
But when we're talking about tools of who is great at mobility, who is great at crowd control, who has unique abilities like, whether it's everything from spell steal to death grip to whatever else, those are things that should feel like all members of a class can bring and contribute that.
That makes sense. Yeah, like if you're a shadow priest and you respec holy, at the moment that feels a little bit weird to me because it's like I hate the light. I'm all about the shadow. I changed my mind. Now I'm all about the light and I hate the shadow, but I'll change my mind again a little bit later when I want to do some world quests or something. So yeah, it's interesting to hear going back more in the direction of class being a class and then subspecs inside of it. Question from You Done Now, who said, with Legion, many classes were redesigned around the artifact and its traits. How are you planning on keeping all classes interesting if you're only planning to keep a few artifact abilities and traits?
So I don't know that it's completely accurate that the classes were redesigned around the artifact.
Sure.
I think the classes were redesigned and artifacts were layered on top of them. Certainly, tuning was certainly done with the artifact in mind, and pacing of rotations at max level through our playtesting of raids and dungeons at 110 in beta was informed by the artifact being present, but they weren't that inextricably intertwined. I think the model that we're looking at is one where there's a baseline, a core set of abilities and tools that a class has. Then there's enhancements that you get from external sources. It wasn't just artifacts, right? It was artifacts, it's set bonuses, it's legendaries, it's trinkets, it's racials. And I think the main system where these things are going to live in Battle for Azeroth is Azerite armor. So you'll have at least 3 pieces of armor that you're wearing with the ability to customize your character accordingly with, and some of the sorts of things that might have been artifact traits may find a home in this system. Not one-for-one mappings, but that type of effect, the sorts of things that are going to add depth and complexity and customization to your characters. Now, that's not to say we're not making a lot of changes where needed to baseline rotations, to baseline classes. If, a class's rotation or a spec's rotation only flowed well at max level because of 5 points you had in a trait that reduced the cost of your builder and some extra filler that you had through an active button, and when we pull those things out, we realize there are some big gaps there. We need to fill those gaps. The plan isn't just to pull them out and say, all right, this is the class. It's going to go back to how it used to be. But that's what new things are for. That's, maybe there's some baseline cost reductions. Maybe the way rotations flow is changed to accommodate the fact that the artifact's not there anymore. Because before there was definitely a bit of, making some room for fitting this extra artifact active ability in, or making sure that you weren't, GCD locked once you had the benefit of the traits. Now, those constraints aren't maybe in the exact same place.
Yeah, I'm just sort of, as you're talking about this, thinking about playing my mage through my head. Not my shaman, sorry. Playing my mage. And how, as fire, Phoenix's Flames is one of the most important abilities. Yep. You need to be using that constantly. Whereas Mark of Alaneth, as Arcane, yes, it's a very important ability, and you should be using it as often as possible. If suddenly Mark of Alaneth went away, I would just be like, all right, well, it's one less button to push every minute. But if Phoenix's Flames goes away, all of a sudden I'm like, how does my rotation even work?
Right, and so the answer there maybe A, your rotation needs to change, but B, if that's central enough, as it was, we want to make sure that people who like that gameplay still have the option to take that, so it's likely going to find its home in talents for fire mages, for those who want it. It's also important to bear in mind, I know it's easy to lose track of this. At this point, your artifact abilities probably feel inseparable from your class. And that's actually a failure in the design. I would argue it's something that we are trying to improve with the Heart of Azeroth and Azerite armor in BFA. You made all the unlocks and all the decisions around your artifact in September 2016, right? You earned all that stuff forever ago.
Yeah.
And at this point, you don't really know where your artifact ends and your spec begins because you haven't had to think about that or make that distinction in a really long time. And with Azerite armor, you'll have much more frequent, changes, new things to look forward to, upgrades, customization, etc. Whereas the artifact, in some ways, it's more like a set bonus that you have for a period of time, and then you move on from and get something else in its place. We never would have designed the artifact system the way we did if we were approaching it from the perspective of all of these things are going to carry forward and become
Right.
baseline parts of the class. If anything, in the past, I think we've spoken about how we regret a lot of homogenization and bloat that's come out of past expansions where we added 3 new abilities, 5 new abilities, not because classes needed them, but just for the sake of hitting those targets of, okay, everybody's got to have 5,
Yeah.
let's come up with 5. The artifact was never about giving everybody, 20 new passives and a new active or 2. It was more about a temporary expansion and extension of your character's capabilities through this weapon that was going to be left behind and replaced with something new and different and also exciting.
Cool. Question here from Jorthas, who asked, are we going to see a lot more in-depth rework for Survival Hunter? It currently feels extremely difficult to play with minimized reward and isn't suitable without certain stats. So obviously we said in the water cooler, I believe, we were talking about how whereas obviously Legion and Warlords before it had a lot of very major changes to how classes worked, we're trying to not do that so much for Battle for Azeroth. I believe Survival Hunter is one of the exceptions there. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Survival's seeing a pretty significant rework. Definitely some hints of that in some of the data mining that's been out there circulating so far. This is actually another example where we put spec fantasy above class fantasy. It's kind of implausible and a little silly that, okay, your class is a hunter. You are a hunter. Upon hitting level 10, you forgot how to use a bow. And you just decided, I'm going to focus on or specialize in also being a potent hand-to-hand combatant. But I'm just going to, never mind. I'm going to put this bow down.
I can't hit people
with
this.
Gun down and just be a pure melee. That was, I think, a step too far. I think we got a bit too caught up in the fantasy of, all right, you have the ranged sniper, you have the close-up melee combatant, and they were almost starting to feel like 2 different classes rather than sides of the same class that more heavily accentuated one element or the other. And so I think the new Survival is likely to have a better balance of melee and ranged capabilities. They will still be, uniquely the melee hunter, but they're still going to be a hunter, and that's important.
Yeah.
And then, yes, there's details about the flow of the rotation, risk-reward, all of that are, I think, being addressed separately from what's the fantasy of the spec.
Yeah, but it's one of them that we've looked at and we said, okay, you need some work.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other those as well, which we will be learning more about in the coming weeks and months. Question here from Moirin, who asked, is the removal of blink-type movement talents from Shaman and Druid on early BFA data mining one of the results of the focus on class uniqueness you mentioned in your blog post, or just an isolated pruning? The dreaded P word.
Probably the former. I think, there's the fact that you describe them as blink-type movement talents is actually kind of telling, right? Because that's a mage ability, and that's where this all began. That's a core mage functionality. And thinking about it, there's value in that type of teleportation being something that is maybe not exclusively, but primarily the domain of the mage. Whereas a druid, they should move quickly. For them, it's been more about dash, that space, right? They transform into animals, and they can have bursts of speed to help. It's not that only mages can have movement abilities. No one else should be mobile. Of course, there should be other movement abilities. But in terms of the exact flavor of how it presents itself, both the druid and the shaman really transform into something else that, whether it's you're free from restrictions or can just move faster. Ghost wolf and travel form, cat, those are more the spaces where movement is appropriate for those classes, as opposed to, I think, frankly, just a very loosely re-kitted, re-described version of Blink. Like, Displacer Beast is basically just Blink.
Yeah.
And Blink is super fun. No question that it's a fun ability to have. No question that it's a potent ability to have. And losing a fun and potent ability, not super fun. I certainly don't expect people to be excited about losing a tool that they enjoyed.
Finally it's gone. Yeah.
Though, for those of you who are Wild Charge devotees, whatever, it's not too much changes. But again, the key here is, and really the dreaded P word, the point of pruning is it's scaling back some things to make room for others. It's not, the point here isn't, we want druids to be weaker all around. They're too strong, we're making them weaker. It's, we'd rather double down on strengths. We'd rather find ways in which they can more uniquely differentiate themselves and feel strong, potent, fun, valuable in their own way, rather than just copying the thing mages can do.
All right. Makes a lot of sense. I believe we got time for one more question. like to answer this one if you think that would be good.
Sure.
This question comes from Kethia, who said, "Any thoughts on Titan Forged weapons in BFA and the implications of the Titan Forged system when applied to what could be the most crucial item slot for a lot of classes and specs?" We've gotten tons of feedback about Titan Forging and War Forging, especially if we've gotten later in Legion. And I think a lot of people are now looking at, wait, so my artifact weapon is going away. I'm going to be using regular weapons again. What does that mean with Titan Forge? Am I going to get like a plus 80 Titan Forged weapon and become a god? Like, is that the sort of thing that's going to happen, or is that something that we're keeping an eye on?
No, that only happens to the player who only runs LFR once ever. That's who gets the plus 80 Titan Forged.
Yeah.
No. So yes, this is a great question, great point. I think, we've heard a lot of feedback on Titan Forging, on the variants, and oh my god, this is a horrible injustice. Look at this person who has a plus 45 eye level Titan Forged item. This is better than what I have as a Mythic Raider, and it's not fair that more harder content's not being properly rewarded, etc., etc. I think one of our core responses to that throughout has always been that it all averages out in the long run. The LFR Raider who has a 975 helm, well, they probably have LFR gear in their other slots. Their average character power isn't meaningfully improved. Slightly improved. It's an awesome excitement for that player, but at the end of the day, people doing the hardest content are the ones who have the best gear. Weapons definitely threaten to disrupt that a bit, because yes, not all slots are equal. If you got a massively Titan Forged two-handed axe, that could actually, suddenly vault you ahead of, like, literally a tier forward in some ways in terms of performance. That's probably a bit too much. So our current thinking here, this isn't 100% final, current thinking is to not let weapons Titan Forge, to let them War Forge, so maybe plus 5, plus 10, but not beyond that at all. So that also maybe helps preserve some clear tier distinctions in terms of what weapons come from, what difficulty of content.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder in general, plans for War Forging in Battle for Azeroth, we're planning on carrying forward the system, but pulling back on it in a couple of places. The Azerite armor slots will not be able to War Forge or Titan Forge at all. Those items are complex enough already without adding the extra decision-making factor of, wait, but this has slightly worse traits, but it's plus 5 Warforged. What do I want to... Just don't worry about it. We want that
just
to be...
no. Just no.
We want those to be clear upgrades or side grades and not in that middle ground space. We also feel like Warforging and Titan Forging in particular is probably just a bit too common in Legion. I think that it actually undermines a lot of the feeling of continued reward when you've seen enough Titan Forged pieces clearing through normal difficulty of a raid, for example, that by the time you're progressing on the middle of Heroic, you're actually not getting as many upgrades as you'd expect or want because you have all this Titan Forged gear. I think keeping it as a surprise, keeping it as a moment of excitement when it happens is valuable, but the second it becomes so common that it's distorting overall gearing patterns and also complicating tuning in some ways, that's probably gone a bit too far. So it's not going away, but we are pulling back from it, hopefully trying to find a middle ground that keeps the elements that excite us while limiting, some of the downsides the players have very rightly pointed out over the past couple of years.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of it is really fun when you get a Titan Forged item. It's just less fun when that turns into, ugh, this one didn't Titan Forge.
Totally. Exactly. As soon as you're in the place where if it doesn't Titan Forge, it's not going to be worth using, that's a problem. Yeah. Or when you're, it's reliable enough that you feel like you should go farm something that was a year-old content because it's realistic that you could get a good Titan Forge on it, and thus it becomes an obligation. That's also not great.
All right. Well, that's all the time that we had. So thank you very much, Ian, for being here and answering these questions.
Yeah, my pleasure.
As always, has been an absolute blast. Battle for Azeroth pre-purchase is now live, so definitely go and check that out. Get access to unlocking the allied races. Really super fun stuff to do there, and you can get your hands on 4 of those new races today if you've already met a lot of the requirements, which I imagine a lot of people who are watching this probably already have. So definitely go and check that out. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for all these questions that came in, and we will see you guys next time.
Sounds great. I'm going to go level my allied race.
Nice. See ya.